Jake and Sarah Miller had been married for 5 years, living the suburban American dream. Jake, a 36-year-old management consultant, spent most of his time traveling for work. His job required constant business trips to different states, leaving Sarah, 33, to manage their household and their 3 children. Emily, 8, Noah, 6, and little Liam, 2. They lived in a spacious 2-story home, tucked away in a quiet cul-de-sac in a middle-class neighborhood, the kind where kids rode bikes and neighbors waved while mowing their lawns. For years, everything seemed normal. Sarah was the kind of wife who always appeared put together. She kept the house immaculate, managed the kids' school schedules, and seemed to handle everything perfectly while Jake was away. Her beauty was undeniable: long blonde hair, sharp blue eyes, and a smile that could melt anyone's heart. But lately, her smile had begun to hide something far more sinister. Jake, blinded by the demands of his career, didn't see the cracks forming. He trusted Sarah implicitly. After all, why wouldn't he? They had a beautiful life, healthy children, and a house that looked like it could be in a real estate ad. Yet, for the past few months, Jake had been feeling increasingly distant from his wife. When he came home from his trips, Sarah was more dismissive, brushing off his questions about her day with vague answers. She'd taken to spending more time outside the house, claiming she needed to clear her head or run errands. But Jake didn't push it. He had deadlines, clients, and emails that demanded his attention. It was only after his 8-year-old daughter, Emily, said something one night that he began to suspect that his perfect world might be falling apart. One evening, Jake returned home earlier than expected from a trip to Denver. He was exhausted but eager to see his kids. The house was unusually quiet for that hour, and as Jake pushed open the door, he could hear the soft murmur of children's voices upstairs. Emily and Noah were whispering to each other, and something in their tone sounded off. He stepped up to the threshold of Emily's bedroom and knocked gently. "Hey guys, what's up?" Emily jumped slightly, her big eyes looking guilty, while Noah looked nervously at his older sister. Jake frowned. This wasn't the playful chatter he was used to. "Dad, we need to tell you something," Emily said hesitantly. Jake sat on the edge of her bed, listening as his children exchanged nervous glances. After a long pause, Noah, barely able to look at him, finally spoke. She's been spending a lot of time with the delivery guy," Noah said, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily, taking a deep breath, added, "We didn't want to tell you because we didn't want to make you sad, but every time you leave, he comes over. They lock the door to your bedroom, and they're in there for a long time." Jake's heart sank. He felt a mix of disbelief, anger, and confusion flood his body. Could his wife, the woman he'd trusted and loved for years, really be doing this? And with the courier? He knew exactly who they were talking about. A younger guy named Kyle who delivered packages from an online grocery service Sarah frequently used. Kyle had always been polite, friendly even, but Jake had never thought anything of it. Suddenly, all the late-night excuses, the hours Sarah spent outside, and her cold demeanor when he was home began to make sense. But Jake didn't want to believe it. He needed proof. Jake decided to wait. He didn't want to accuse Sarah outright, not without solid evidence. So he started watching her behavior more closely. The next time he left for a trip, he installed a small camera in the living room, discreetly hidden behind a bookshelf. He hated himself for doing it, but he needed to know the truth. When he returned from his trip a few days later, Jake retrieved the footage. His stomach churned as he watched the video. Sure enough, just a few hours after he'd left, Kyle showed up. Sarah let him in, and within minutes, they were wrapped in each other's arms, kissing passionately before disappearing upstairs. The sight of it made Jake's blood boil. That night, he confronted her. "Sarah, we need to talk," he said calmly, though his insides were on fire. Sarah, who was sitting on the couch scrolling through her phone, barely looked up. "What's up?" she asked nonchalantly, as if nothing in the world could be wrong. "I know about Kyle," Jake said, his voice tightening. "I saw the footage." Her eyes flickered for just a moment, but she quickly composed herself, leaning back and crossing her arms. "Oh, please," she scoffed. "You're never here. What did you expect me to do? Sit around waiting for you to come back and pretend we have a real marriage?" Jake was stunned. He hadn't expected her to deny it, but the casualness with which she admitted to the affair left him speechless. "You're cheating on me. With a courier of all people." His voice was louder now, filled with the betrayal and hurt he'd been bottling up. Sarah rolled her eyes and stood up, walking toward the kitchen. "Get over it, Jake. You're always gone. You chose your job over this family a long time ago. If you think I'm gonna sit around feeling guilty, think again." Jake couldn't believe what he was hearing. He had worked hard to provide for their family, sacrificing time with his kids and enduring the long hours because he thought it was what they all needed. But now, his wife's complete lack of remorse stunned him into silence. "I want a divorce," he finally said, his voice flat but resolute. Sarah turned to face him, a wicked smile playing on her lips. "Good luck with that. I'll take everything. The house, the kids. You won't stand a chance against me." Jake knew Sarah could be manipulative, but this side of her was something he hadn't fully understood until now. His mind was reeling, but one thing was clear. He had to protect his kids. This wasn't the woman he thought she was, and he needed to get them away from her influence. Little did Jake know that Sarah had far more up her sleeve than just fighting over property. The worst was yet to come. Jake's mind was in turmoil after the confrontation. His thoughts raced as he wondered how to protect the kids from Sarah's toxic influence. He didn't doubt her ability to manipulate the legal system, knowing full well how ruthless she could be. He had seen glimpses of her cruelty before, in the way she dealt with people who crossed her, but never imagined she would turn that side of her on their own family. Now, as her cold smirk echoed in his memory, he knew she wouldn't back down without a fight. The next day, Jake filed for divorce. He contacted a lawyer and made it clear that his top priority was getting custody of the children. He didn't care about the house or the money. He just wanted to make sure Emily, Noah, and Liam were safe from Sarah's deceitful grasp. However, Jake underestimated Sarah's spite. A week after he filed, a legal notice arrived at his doorstep. Sarah was countersuing not just Jake, but their own children. The notice claimed that Emily and Noah had fabricated false claims about her infidelity and were being used as pawns in Jake's plot to destroy her reputation. Jake was speechless as he read through the accusations. She was trying to paint him as an abusive husband who had brainwashed their kids into lying about her. "She's suing our kids?" Jake said aloud, pacing his living room in disbelief. His lawyer, David Winters, a seasoned divorce attorney, was equally taken aback. "I've seen a lot of things in my career, Jake, but this is a new low. Suing your own children? She's going to make it ugly." Jake's stomach churned as he thought about what this would do to Emily and Noah. The kids had already been through enough. Sarah's manipulation, her complete lack of guilt. Everything was turning into a nightmare, but he knew he had to play it smart. Getting emotional wouldn't help. If Sarah wanted to play dirty, he would have to be ready for it. He needed a strategy that would keep his children safe without letting this spiral into a long, painful battle that would scar them forever. After the initial shock of Sarah's lawsuit subsided, Jake and David began formulating a plan. The legal system was messy, and Jake knew Sarah's accusations could drag on for months or even years. David suggested they consider mediation to settle out of court, but Jake wasn't sure Sarah would agree to anything short of total domination. Nevertheless, David put in the request. Jake, meanwhile, had started spending more time at home. Though he still needed to travel for work, he managed to cut back on the number of business trips, knowing how critical his presence was for the kids during this turbulent time. Emily and Noah, although confused and hurt by their mom's betrayal, were resilient. They clung to their father, who provided them with the emotional support they needed. But Sarah's behavior only grew worse. She became openly hostile towards Jake whenever he was around. She would hurl insults at him in front of the children, belittling him for his decision to divorce her. "You think you're a hero, Jake? You're nothing but a coward," she spat one evening as he was preparing dinner for the kids. "Running off to your job, pretending to be the good guy. No wonder you can't keep a family together." Jake remained silent, not wanting to escalate things in front of the children, but inside he was seething. He knew Sarah was trying to provoke him into losing his temper, hoping to use it against him in court. It was all part of her twisted game. Things took an even more shocking turn when Jake discovered that Sarah wasn't just content with her affair with the courier. She had moved on to another man, an old flame named Mark Thompson, who had recently come back into town. Mark was a successful entrepreneur, someone Sarah had dated briefly in college before they parted ways. Jake didn't know much about Mark, but from what he had heard, the guy was a notorious womanizer. Sarah didn't bother hiding her relationship with Mark. In fact, she flaunted it, bringing him around the house while Jake was there to pick up the kids. The sight of them together, laughing and carrying on like nothing had happened, made Jake's blood boil, but he kept his composure. His children were watching and they came first. "What's up, Jake?" Mark said with a smug grin the first time they crossed paths. "Heard about the big D. Tough break, man." Jake wanted to punch him in the face, but instead, he forced a tight-lipped smile and walked past them. Sarah shot him a look of triumph, clearly reveling in the fact that she had moved on so quickly. It was as if the 5 years they'd spent together, the 3 children they had, meant nothing to her. Jake knew now more than ever that leaving her was the right decision. Mediation day came, and unsurprisingly, Sarah was as combative as ever. The mediator, an older woman named Janine, tried to keep things civil, but Sarah wouldn't budge. She insisted on keeping the house and full custody of the kids, claiming Jake was never around to begin with. Jake's lawyer, David, fought hard, but it was clear that this wouldn't be resolved easily. After hours of back and forth, Jake was left with a difficult choice. If he continued to fight for custody, Sarah would drag their children into the middle of an ugly court battle. The thought of putting Emily, Noah, and Liam through such a traumatic experience made Jake's heart ache. He didn't want to see his kids suffer any more than they already had. After a long silence, Jake made the hardest decision of his life. "I'll give you the house," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "And you can have primary custody. But I want joint legal custody, and I want regular visitation rights. You're not keeping me away from my kids." Sarah looked smug, as if she had won some great victory, but Jake didn't care. He'd made this decision for his children, not for her. Mediation ended with a settlement. Sarah got the house and primary custody, but Jake would still be a significant part of the children's lives. He knew he was walking away from a lot, his home, his financial stability, but he didn't care. The well-being of his children was all that mattered. Just when Jake thought things couldn't get more complicated, something unexpected happened at work. His boss, Mike, called him into the office one afternoon and delivered news that left Jake speechless. "You're being promoted, Jake. VP of Strategy. We've been watching your performance, and you've earned it." The promotion came with a hefty pay raise and a lighter travel schedule, meaning Jake could spend more time at home, with his children. It was exactly what he needed. For the first time in months, Jake felt a sense of hope. His life was finally turning around. He could provide for his kids without sacrificing as much time away from them. He'd found a balance, something he had been chasing for years. But as Jake prepared to move forward with his life, he knew there was one more thing he had to confront. His relationship with Sarah wasn't over yet. She was still the mother of his children, and she was still a thorn in his side. It was a crisp Saturday afternoon when Jake arrived at Sarah's house to pick up the kids for their weekend visit. As usual, Sarah greeted him with her usual look of disdain, while Mark lounged on the couch, scrolling through his phone like he owned the place. Jake could feel the tension in the air as he called out to Emily, Noah, and little Liam to grab their things. He didn't want to stick around longer than necessary. Just as he was about to turn and leave, Sarah casually dropped a bombshell. "Oh, by the way, Jake," she said, her voice dripping with false nonchalance. "Mark and I are getting married. I guess the kids will be spending a lot more time with their new stepdad." Jake froze mid-step. He turned slowly to face her, his pulse quickening as his mind struggled to process her words. Married? How could she move on so quickly? They weren't even officially divorced yet. And now, she was marrying this sleazebag who had been nothing but smug and condescending toward him? "Are you serious?" Jake asked, his voice barely concealing the disbelief and anger that bubbled beneath the surface. Sarah shrugged, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of triumph and malice. "Why not? We've been talking about it for a while now. He's great with the kids, and let's face it, you're not exactly father of the year material." Jake clenched his fists, his jaw tight. He had worked tirelessly to maintain his connection with his children, even in the middle of a brutal divorce. But Sarah was always looking for ways to twist the knife deeper, and this was her cruelest tactic yet. "I'll make sure this doesn't affect the kids," Jake said through gritted teeth. "You can marry whoever you want, but I'm still their father, and I'm not going anywhere." Sarah's lips curled into a mocking smile. "We'll see about that." The weeks following Sarah's announcement were a whirlwind of emotions for Jake. He spent as much time as possible with the kids, but Mark's presence in their lives was becoming more intrusive. Whenever Jake dropped them off, Mark was there, acting as if he had already taken Jake's place. He started taking Emily to her soccer practices, helped Noah with his homework, and even carried Liam on his shoulders as if he were the proud father of the family. It made Jake sick to his stomach. Worse yet, the children seemed confused by the sudden changes. Emily, once so attached to her father, was now starting to refer to Mark as mom's friend when talking to Jake. Noah seemed more withdrawn, and Jake could tell something was bothering him, but the boy refused to talk about it. And little Liam, who was too young to understand what was happening, seemed perfectly content with the attention he was getting from both men. The more Mark inserted himself into the children's lives, the more Jake felt his role as their father slipping away. But what really sent him over the edge was when Sarah started pushing for a new custody arrangement. She claimed that since she and Mark were getting married, the children should spend more time at their home with their new family. Jake fought back with everything he had, but Sarah had resources, and with Mark's support, she was able to hire a high-profile lawyer who specialized in contentious custody battles. Jake's promotion had helped him financially, but he couldn't compete with the combined forces of Sarah and Mark's legal team. The pressure was mounting, and Jake could feel the walls closing in on him. It was during one of Jake's weekend visits that everything changed. He had taken the kids to the park, trying to give them a sense of normalcy amidst the chaos of their parents' divorce. While Emily and Liam played on the swings, Jake noticed Noah sitting quietly by himself on a bench, his face clouded with something he hadn't seen before: fear. Jake sat down beside him, careful not to push too hard. "Hey, buddy, you okay?" Noah didn't answer right away. He looked down at his sneakers, kicking at the dirt. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "Dad, I don't like Mark," Noah said quietly, his voice trembling. Jake's heart skipped a beat. He had always sensed that something was off with the way Noah interacted with Mark. But hearing his son say it out loud hit him like a punch to the gut. "Why don't you like him, buddy? Did something happen?" Noah hesitated, biting his lip before continuing. "He's mean when you're not around. He yells at us, and he scares me sometimes." Jake's chest tightened. The idea of another man mistreating his children, made his blood boil. "Noah, listen to me. If Mark ever does anything to hurt you, or your sister, or Liam, you have to tell me right away. Okay? No matter what." Noah nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. "But Mom doesn't believe me when I tell her. She says Mark's just teaching us discipline." Jake's hands clenched into fists, his nails digging into his palms. Sarah knew. She knew what was going on, and she was turning a blind eye to it, all because of her twisted obsession with keeping Mark around. Jake knew he couldn't confront Sarah or Mark without solid evidence. It wasn't just about winning a custody battle anymore. It was about protecting his children. So he started documenting everything. Every strange remark Noah made, every time Emily seemed withdrawn, every little sign that something was off. He also installed a voice recorder in the kids' backpacks. It was a move that made him feel uneasy, but he was desperate. He needed proof of Mark's mistreatment, something concrete that he could take to court. And soon enough, the evidence started to pile up. One evening, when the kids were at Sarah's house, the recorder picked up a conversation between Mark and Noah. Mark's voice was low and menacing, as he berated the boy for not cleaning up after himself. The words were harsh, filled with threats and intimidation. It wasn't just a matter of discipline. Mark was crossing a line. Jake brought the recordings to his lawyer, David, who agreed that they had enough to file for an emergency custody hearing. "This changes everything, Jake," David said. "If the court hears this, they'll have no choice but to intervene." The emergency custody hearing was tense. Sarah sat on one side of the courtroom, flanked by her high-profile attorney and Mark, while Jake sat across from them with David. The judge listened carefully as both sides presented their cases. Sarah's lawyer tried to paint Jake as an absentee father, more concerned with his career than his kids. But when David played the recordings of Mark's abusive behavior, the courtroom fell silent. Sarah's face went pale as the audio filled the room. For the first time since the divorce proceedings began, she looked unsure of herself. Mark, on the other hand, sat stone-faced, his arrogance evaporating in an instant. When the judge finally spoke, his voice was firm. "Based on the evidence presented, I am granting temporary full custody to Mr. Miller. Ms. Miller, you will have supervised visitation until further notice. This court does not tolerate any form of abuse, and I will not allow these children to be placed in harm's way." Jake exhaled, relief washing over him. He had won, at least for now. His children were safe, and for the first time in months, he felt like he was regaining control of his life. With temporary full custody, Jake made sure to rebuild a safe and nurturing environment for his children. He moved into a smaller house closer to their school, keeping his new promotion while maintaining a much better work-life balance. The kids began to open up more, healing from the emotional strain of the past year. Noah, in particular, became more confident, free from Mark's looming presence. Sarah, meanwhile, was left reeling from the court's decision. Her relationship with Mark soured quickly after the hearing. The man she thought she loved had been exposed for who he truly was, and even she couldn't ignore the damage it had done to their family. Within a few months, Mark was gone from her life, leaving her to pick up the pieces of the wreckage she had helped create. Though Jake's relationship with Sarah remained strained, he made sure to be civil for the sake of the children. He didn't hate her, he pitied her. She had chosen her own path, and now she had to live with the consequences. Jake, on the other hand, was determined to be the father his children needed. In the end, Jake had learned that no matter how much life tries to knock you down, it's the love and protection you offer to the ones who matter most that truly defines your strength.